Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea and Japan announce high-level talks to be held next month on their export management, a meeting aimed at ultimately ending the controls on exports imposed earlier this year by Tokyo. The Bank of Korea decides to keep interest rates steady at this month's meeting, but it also downgrades its estimates for economic growth this year and next. And North Korea again test fires what it calls a super-large multiple rocket launcher, a test personally overseen by leader Kim Jong-un and timed to send a message to the U.S. on Thanksgiving. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. North Korea has test-fired a super-large multiple rocket launcher, its 13th projectile test of the year, and a weapon it seems to be perfecting. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
North Korean state media says leader Kim Jong-un was very satisfied with Thursday's tests of the regime's super-large multiple rocket launcher. The North's official Korean Central News Agency said Friday the Academy of Defense Science conducted the drill to finally examine the combat capability of the launcher. The North's ruling party paper, the Nodongsima, reiterated this, saying Kim had overseen the test firing. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said two short-range projectiles were fired from the eastern region of Yeonpo in Hamgyeongnam province towards the East Sea at around 4:59 p.m. on Thursday. The projectiles flew some 380 kilometers while their maximum flight altitude was detected to be 97 kilometers. The military said Thursday's projectiles appeared to have been fired from a super-large multiple rocket launcher similar to the North's previous provocation, which was carried out less than a month ago. This marks the fourth time this year the regime has fired projectiles from a super-large multiple rocket launcher, but this time the time between projectiles was calculated to be around 30 seconds, significantly decreased from the initial 17 to 19 minutes it previously took the North to fire consecutively. This makes the projectiles harder to intercept using South Korea's current anti-missile systems. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also denounced the North's latest launch, calling the projectiles ballistic missiles, as opposed to Seoul's analysis, adding that such actions are a serious challenge for the international community. The South Korean military stated it cannot disclose whether Tokyo had asked Seoul to share intelligence related to the provocation and that such information cannot be made public after South Korea conditionally extended the bilateral intel sharing pact. The latest provocation comes less than a week after South Korea criticized the regime for violating the Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement, following Pyongyang's artillery fire drills just north of the western sea border, with the south from the border islet of Changnin last Saturday. It's believed that the North's move is intended to pressure Seoul and Washington by hinting that a lack of progress in denuclearization talks by the year's end could signal a turning point that leads to heightened military tensions. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
North Korea's rocket launcher test was timed to fall on one of America's biggest holidays, Thanksgiving. And U.S. media outlets are reporting that the launch is the regime telling Washington that the clock is ticking on the nuclear talks. Oh Soo-young reports.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sent a Thanksgiving message to U.S. President Donald Trump through his regime's latest missile launch, upping pressure on Washington to comply to Pyongyang's demands on denuclearization dialogue. That's the common perception among American media outlets as they reported on the North's latest firing of two projectiles. Reuters said the launch served as a reminder of the North's year-end deadline for the US to come up with new approaches to restart their stalled denuclearization talks. It also noted the test firing came one day before the second anniversary of the North's ICBM test, a missile that reportedly has long enough range to hit the US mainland. The launch is the latest in a series of provocations from the North this year, after the second summit between Trump and Kim broke down in Hanoi, as did working-level discussions in October to salvage the talks. Pyongyang has raised the stakes in recent weeks, rejecting President Trump's call to return to dialogue and slamming what it calls the US's hostile policy, as well as its shortage of incentives to the North. The Washington Post says Thursday's test was an expression of the North's frustration over the Trump administration's refusal to grant its sanctions relief. The Trump administration provided its usual muted response to the launch. In line with its previous statements on North Korea's missile tests, the US State Department said it's well aware of the launch and is monitoring the situation by consulting closely with its allies in the region. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
With South Korean President Moon Jae-in looking to reshuffle his cabinet ahead of next April's general election, sources say he'll likely announce his picks for a new prime minister and justice minister sometime next week. According to multiple sources from the ruling party camp, the president may nominate Kim Jin-pyo, a four-term lawmaker with the ruling Democratic Party, as prime minister. Kim is an expert in economics and has served previously as finance minister, doubling as deputy prime minister. For the vacant post of Justice Minister, Moon is said to be looking at Choo Mi-ae, a five-term lawmaker who's also served as chief of the Democratic Party. Known as a reformer, she would contribute to the administration's reform of the prosecution. The president might also replace some ministers so they can run in the election next year, which will be the only general election during Moon's term in office. Many in Hong Kong welcomed President Trump's signing of legislation aimed at protecting the rights of the Hong Kong people. But Beijing and the Chinese-backed Hong Kong government are not so happy about it and are considering sending in the military. Kim Da-mi reports.
Following President Trump's decision to sign legislation back in Hong Kong, China is now considering rolling out its military in the city. China's defense spokesperson said on Thursday that the Chinese military personnel stationed in Hong Kong are to protect the country's sovereignty, according to the Hong Kong Basic Law and Military Law. The Beijing-backed Hong Kong government was also quick to criticize Washington for interfering in Hong Kong affairs. A government spokesperson said Thursday that the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act is a two-sided law that seems to support human rights and democracy, but in fact forcefully controls Hong Kong just like UN sanctions. It also pointed out that Washington's decision will have a negative impact on economic benefits and the relationship between the U.S. and Hong Kong. On the other hand, Thursday was a day of celebration for people in Hong Kong. Addressed by Hong Kong's pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in Central District, this time to celebrate and thank the U.S. president.
As democracy legislation has been signed, our goal for the next stage is to implement this democracy legislation everywhere.
Calling the new law Trump's Thanksgiving present, protesters waved American flags and revealed their plans to hold another big rally on December 8th. Despite strong objections from Beijing, President Trump signed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act on Wednesday, which ensures the civil rights of Hong Kong's people and could threaten attempts to end the U.S.-China trade war. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
South Korea and Japan have agreed to hold high-level talks next month on their export controls. The decision follows the announcement last Friday that South Korea would conditionally extend its military intel sharing pact with Japan. Kim Hae-sung has this report.
Trade representatives from Seoul and Tokyo have agreed to hold senior-level talks on export controls in the coming weeks. South Korea's trade ministry said Friday that working-level trade ministry officials from the two countries met in Seoul Thursday and agreed to hold higher-level talks in Tokyo in the third week of December before the planned trilateral summit between South Korea, China, and Japan.
At the 7th Export Management Policy Talks, we'll exchange ideas on domestic and external situations regarding export controls. We will also work to resolve pending issues between our countries.
The resumption of export control talks will mark the first such talks since June 2016. In July, Tokyo imposed export restrictions on 3 key high-tech exports to South Korea and shortly after removed South Korea from its white list of preferred trading partners. South Korea then decided to drop Japan from its white list of countries with fast-track trade status. In September, South Korea also filed a complaint with the WTO over Japan's export restrictions on key high-tech materials, but recently Seoul decided to suspend the ongoing dispute process at the WTO after announcing it'll conditionally extend its military sharing pact with Japan known as GSOMIA.
Our goal is to return to the situation before Japan's export curbs were announced in July. Talks at the WTO were more focused on WTO legal procedures, while the export controls talks will be conducted by export management government officials who are experts in the field. We'll approach the issues in depth.
Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry on Friday also confirmed Thursday's trade talks and said that the resumption of talks and export controls is based on the condition that negotiations on all issues are moving in the right direction. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said he hopes the talks result in an upgrade of export management systems in both countries. Seoul and Tokyo will hold Director General level talks in Vienna next Wednesday to lay the groundwork for next month's meeting. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, senior ruling party lawmakers, the government, and Blue House officials have been discussing last week's decision to conditionally extend GSOMIA, vowing to resolve the nation's trade and historical disputes with Japan. Our political correspondent, Kim Mo-gyun, has more.
Top of the three sides' agenda was Seoul's decision late last week to conditionally extend GSOMIA. During their meeting at the National Assembly on Friday, senior lawmakers from the ruling party and top officials from the government and the presidential office agreed the decision was appropriate and timely. And with Japan agreeing to hold a director-level meeting next week, they expressed hope the talks will be an opportunity to start rebuilding trade relations between Seoul and Tokyo.
Considering the latest progress between Seoul and Tokyo as momentum for change, the trade ministry will work to swiftly solve the trade dispute. We hope Japan seriously engages in the talks and we can resolve the problem together.
After their hour-long closed-door meeting, the three sides agree on the need to further communicate with Tokyo until it agrees to withdraw its trade curbs against South Korea and put Seoul back on its list of trusted trade partners. However, the three sides stress the need for efforts to develop the nation's manufacturing competitiveness to protect the South Korean economy from similar incidents that might happen in the future.
The ruling party, government and the Blue House agreed that South Korea should continue efforts to strengthen its manufacturing of industrial materials, parts and equipment for innovative growth.
The ruling Democratic Party said that it will work to pass related legislation in the National Assembly and actively promote the need to pass a proposed $1.8 billion budget in the area for 2020, which is double last year's amount. The top office also promised utmost efforts to strengthen related policies and ensure the planned negotiations with Japan go smoothly.
We'll make sure the high-level negotiations with Japan will be held without a hitch. The government will keep implementing policies to develop the local industrial materials and equipment sectors.
On the diplomatic front, the three sides pledged continued efforts to narrow differences with Japan to find a wise solution on the compensation dispute over Tokyo's wartime forced labor of Koreans. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea has slightly cut the country's economic growth projection for both 2019 and 2020, though it still expects next year to be better than this year. Also, the BOK, in its last meeting of the year on interest rates, has decided to leave rates where they are. Yoon Jung-min has more.
Amid slowing exports and investment, the Bank of Korea revised downward the country's GDP growth to 2% for this year from its earlier projection of 2.2%. The central bank has also cut the projection for next year to 2.3% from its earlier prediction of 2.5%. But that's still higher than this year's projection as the bank expects the economy and trade starting to pick up from next year.
We have lowered this year's growth rate by 0.2 percentage points from the projection in July, mainly because of the sluggish recovery in exports and investment. Next year, the growth is expected to slightly rise compared to this year, due mainly to better global trade and the semiconductor market recovery.
The central bank also predicted this year's consumer inflation to be 0.4%, due mainly to lower oil and agricultural product prices. However, it is expected to reach 1% next year due to lower downside pressure from the supply side. At its final Monetary Policy Board meeting of 2019, the Bank of Korea on Friday kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 1.25% for November. The all-time low rate remained steady following earlier rate cuts by 25 basis points each in July and October this year. The central bank has kept the key rate steady to wait and see what the effects are of the previous rate cuts. Exports continue to fall for the 11th straight month in October due to falling semiconductor shipments and slowing global trade due to the U.S.-China trade spat. Inflation remains far below the central bank's target of 2%. The low inflation has added to concerns over possible deflation, but the central bank and the government expect an upbeat sentiment next year dismissing concerns over possible deflation. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
For the first time in 8 months, the 3 major indicators of industrial activity in South Korea have all dropped. But future economic indicators were positive. Hong Yu has more.
Industrial output across all sectors went down 0.4% in October compared to the previous month. Statistics Korea says this was mainly due to poor performance in the mining and manufacturing industries, which saw a 1.7% decrease compared to September, despite a better performance by the semiconductor sector. Car production saw an on-month decrease and electronic component production fell by 7.0% in October compared to September. Statistics Korea said that the decline in electronic component production was due to a global oversupply of display panels. Retail sales also decreased by 0.5%, the second month in a row they've fallen. The agency said this was mainly due to less winter clothes purchases because of the warm weather. Facility investment showed a decrease of 0.8%, putting an end to the 4-month-long upward trend. And the coincident index, which measures the current economic conditions in the business cycle, also went down slightly. However, the leading economic index, which shows future business conditions, went up for the second straight month. It's the first time in 28 months that the leading economic index has seen a consecutive increase. Statistics Korea said the future economic prospects are a positive sign, but it is too early to be optimistic due to the stagnant current economic conditions. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Dr. Kim, thank you as always for coming on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
So today, the Bank of Korea decided to keep interest rates where they are. Many say, though, that there will be another rate cut eventually. What do you see in today's decision?
Yes, today's Bank of Korea's decision, which is not changing interest rate, is pretty much expected in the market. And central bank has cut interest rate in October by 25 basis points, and it was a preemptive and not much expected decision in October. After that, Korean economic situation hasn't been much changed at all. So quite a few market participants expected that Bank of Korea is not changing interest rate for this time. On today's central bank's decision, it should be pointed out that there were a minority opinion of interest rate cut. I think that's going to be a big hint for next year's possible interest rate cut.
Got it. Well, also the BOK is the latest organization to cut Korea's economic growth forecast. It's calling for 2% growth this year and 2.3% for next year. There are other estimates out there, though, that Korea won't even reach those levels. What do you think about that?
Well, basically, Bank of Korea is pretty conservative institution, and they updated its forecast on this year's economic growth down to 2% from previous 2.2%. But in today's Korean economic situation, domestic consumption, domestic investment, and exports are all weaker than expected. So I believe that it will be extremely difficult to have 2% economic growth for this year. And Bank of Korea also decreased forecast of next year's economic growth from 2.5% to 2.3%. So that really depends on next year's global economic recovery and cheap export recovery.
So those targets might be out of reach then. Well, this week, Korea hosted multiple summits with countries in Southeast Asia. We had many leaders here in town. What do you think came out of these summits economically? And what should be the focus going forward on growth?
Korea is one of the most heavily foreign-dependent countries in the world. And the trade is too much actually focused on China and United States. So I believe that expanding economic relations with ASEAN member countries is an important and appropriate economic development strategy. As of now, actually, Vietnam is the third largest trading partner of Korea, and ASEAN as a whole is the second largest trading partner to Korea. So President Moon's meeting with leaders of ASEAN member countries will be an effective accelerator on mutual economic prosperity in the future. But I have to say that we have to expand more economic relations with particularly Indonesia, which has 270 population.
Indeed. Well, speaking of prosperity, the American economy seems to be doing okay. U.S. stocks are at all-time highs. What's the story in the U.S.?
According to the Beige Book of U.S. Fed released yesterday, U.S. economy is growing at a moderate pace, which is something improved evaluation compared to that of the October's evaluation on U.S. economy. And naturally, U.S. stock market is booming over Santa rally due to positive news on economy and the possibility of phase one U.S.-China trade deal. For example, U.S. S&P 500 index gained over 25%, and Dow Jones Industrial also gained over 20% from the beginning of the year. I think this momentum will be continued until the early next year.
Right. Well, speaking of that trade deal, what is President Trump's signing of this bill on Hong Kong? How will that affect the trade talks?
The bill supporting Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters has passed almost unanimously, both of the House and the Senate, with bipartisan support. And the Beijing strongly blamed Washington on this matter. It is true that the bill made U.S.-China trade negotiation more complicated, but I don't think the bill for supporting Hong Kong people dismantle the U.S.-China trade talk, because completing the phase one deal is very, very important on both sides.
Got it. All right, Professor Kim, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, in South Korea's huge technology sector, one up-and-coming industry is tech for pets. There are tons of gadgets coming out designed to keep pets company, entertain them, and even feed and protect them. Jo Sung-min has more.
2-year-old pup Loco has recently found a new fun activity, which is chasing a self-moving AI robot around the house. The bone-shaped robot provides the puppy with the required amount of daily exercise, and it even drops treats as incentive. It also scans the dog's movements and registers a daily journal for what Loco does throughout the day. That makes it perfect for owners who either have to leave their dogs at home alone for a long time or are too busy to walk them. Gamangi is a black poodle who now gets directly fed by this pet-sitting robot. Made out of a used smartphone, this robot has a small camera and a screen, allowing owners to check on their pets whenever they want. It also has a special alarm feature that alerts owners when their dogs make a mess at home.
It has 2 special features which focus on nurturing and safety. We're using old smartphones to cut down on the production cost while boosting performance.
Another pet bot that's already a massive hit in Korea despite its premium price is an automated cat litter box. Industry experts predict new pet-carrying robots will become widely sought-after products as they offer great help to pet owners with busy schedules.
In addition to playing with pets, new robots are likely to be designed to take care of other aspects of a pet's life.
Experts also highlighted the potential of the global pet tech market, saying it is showing annual growth of 20% and is predicted to grow into a $20 billion market by 2025. Jo Sung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
Following the Inter-Korean